Guys, welcome back to the channel. And yeah, we got some stuff to talk about. So, some of you might know that I am a fan of the Doom franchise. I've covered Alex Terrible's vocal reactions to both the BFG division and The Only Thing That They Fear Is You. Both songs were created by the lead producer for those soundtracks, Mick Gordon. There was some issues back when the game first released. The Doom Eternal soundtrack released late, and the quality on a lot of the tracks wasn't up to par with what fans were expecting from Mick's work. So Mick actually tweeted back at some of this stuff, saying that he didn't mix some of the tracks on the soundtrack, and that raised a lot of questions from fans. They're like, okay, well, if you didn't mix and master and do a lot of the tracks on the soundtrack, who the hell did? And it turns out that id Software's lead audio engineer had to actually do a lot of the work on the original soundtrack. The problem is there was a ton of conflict and a whole lot of behind the scenes issues going on between Mick and id Software whenever it came down to the soundtrack getting made. Marty Stratton, the executive producer for id Software, posted a very long letter about some of the issues that they dealt with trying to get the soundtrack created, and how there was a lot of problems that were centered around Mick Gordon himself, saying things that he wasn't making deadlines that he was supposed to, and that he was difficult to deal with. I'm going to post the link to the article in the description to this video too. It's a very interesting read, and it offers a whole lot of backstory behind how this most recent mess has even come into light. So I highly recommend you check it out when you have time. Last week, Mick posted an even longer account, basically whistleblowing a whole ton of issues going on at id Software, and saying things like the team was, more specifically Marty, was fairly abusive to Mick during the process, and that he ignored a lot of Mick's concerns and questions that he had regarding the process for getting the soundtrack done, and that the timelines for getting stuff done was completely unrealistic. There was problem after problem after problem. Hell, Mick didn't even have a framework of what the game was supposed to look like when they were expecting music to be made. I'm going to post a link to that whistleblowing account also in the description. It's a very long article, but it's extremely detailed, and Mick has receipts for some of his talking points, which quite frankly make his argument very compelling. So we're going to check out just a quick recap article. This is from IGN. They're saying that Bethesda actually responded to Mick Gordon's accusations about how horrible the working environment was for Mick when he was trying to get the Doom Eternal original soundtrack going. They said that Gordon's account of Doom Eternal soundtrack development both mischaracterized and misrepresented the team at id Software, and that Bethesda unequivocally supports Marty Stratton, Chad Mossholder, who's the audio designer, and the team at id Software. Bethesda adds that it rejects the distortion of the truth and selective presentation of incomplete facts. So, going over their exact statement, Bethesda says, the recent post by Mick Gordon both mischaracterized and misrepresented the team at id Software, the development of Doom Eternal, Marty Stratton, and Chad Mossholder with a one-sided and unjust account of an irreparable professional relationship. You know, it's important to note that Mick, when he did his statement, as a matter of fact, let me go to it real quick. Mick mentions how he pointed out the issues regarding the soundtrack. He said that finalizing Doom Eternal's intricate music was practically impossible this early in development. Levels were unfinalized or non-existent, so the music's context wasn't clear to him. He also said that his only option was guesswork. He said that there was no time for iteration and zero wiggle room. He also mentions that as development progressed, it became obvious whoever thought up the music budget also had no idea about the game's true scope. Stages blew out in size far beyond what had been anticipated. Hour-long levels where players traverse fantastic worlds with epic vistas and tricky platforming sections had just 30 seconds allocated to exploration music. Doom's mantra is wall-to-wall music, which made this oversight seem laughable. Yeah, that's a problem, because the music could nowhere near, in fact, reach the scope of what the game was bringing. Not to mention, Mick also mentions how he works straight for months, desperately trying to stay on top of things, and each week seemed to bring a new set of problems. He said he was cut out of music meetings, emails went unanswered, the mandated file transfer system auto-deleted all the music files every 2 weeks. Id Software withheld important information, and I was hardly ever able to check my music in-game. That is absolutely insane. This is some crazy shit. And that's only just a small piece of the things that he's talking about. Check this out. So he even details pay issues. And look, we got a receipt right here. After working 8 months without pay, I was paid in January 2019, but after that, I wasn't paid again for 11 months. Look at this. Making it awesome certainly takes time, but I understand the time pressure the project is under, and I can assure you we are crunching over here as hard as possible with that in mind. I hope to jump on a call with Redacted later today to talk through it. It's also important to note that in Mick's statement here, he didn't mention anybody else's name on the dev team. The only person that he actually openly mentions is Marty Stratton. This is largely done to keep people from making threats against the dev team, because there's a lot of people that love Mick Gordon and love his work. I love Mick Gordon and his work, but there's a lot of people in the online space that take things way too far and make threats and dox people and all kind of crazy stuff. And that's no good. That's no good, and it's not acceptable under any circumstances. So yeah, so we got pay issues here. Arguments over pay began with id Software throughout 2 entire suites written for Super Gordon S and Mars Core shortly after the QuakeCon 2018 premiere. The rejection was bad enough. It meant scoring 4 levels simultaneously the following month, but id Software also denied payment on the notion they changed their mind and no longer liked the music. But as development continued, they grew reluctant to approve anything I delivered. Uncertainty, crunch, blowouts. I mean, and then not to mention the actual problems that centered around the release of the soundtrack itself, because the soundtrack was supposed to come with the collector's edition for the game, right? Which means that you pay for the game and you're paying a little extra for, the little extra goodies that come with it and the original soundtrack, which is a standalone project. Because typically when it comes down to games, and a lot of you already know this, if there's a original soundtrack that comes out with the game, the musical score and arrangement is different than what you hear in the game, because the game has to have a lot of ambient parts in the music. There's a lot of exploration music, so to speak, but the soundtrack is a little bit more streamlined. But that means you have to engineer and produce it that way. It's not that you as soon as the game, you just take the music out of the game and then you just throw it on a CD and you just send it out. It doesn't work like that. So the soundtrack didn't come out the same time that the game did. So people were like, what the hell? Why are we not getting our soundtrack? We got the game. Well, why is it delayed? And then when they finally do release it, the audio quality isn't up to par. So it was a big kick in the pants to a lot of the people that pre-ordered or got the collector's edition to the game. Not to mention, you got consumer protection going on that protects the consumer from buying something and receiving a product that wasn't expected of them, or not getting it when they were supposed to in the first place. So you've got a lot of legal issues surrounding stuff like this too. There's no doubt that kind of pressure really hurt id Software, and they in turn put a lot of that back on Mick. So there was no strategy for the soundtrack. For reasons I still don't understand, he flatly denied me the contract and refused to do anything about the soundtrack, saying he didn't want to cause a distraction. Didn't want to cause a distraction? Didn't they just announce it at E3, the largest gaming show of the year? Couldn't they see the issue of taking pre-orders on a product without any agreement or strategy to actually deliver it? Yes, that would be a problem. I know I would be pissed. So the issues continued. I mean, you got crunch, and development crunch is hard on the employees. In the video game industry, crunch is a common thing because the company is trying to clean up, polish, get things done and knocked out in the weeks leading up to the gold phase, which is when the game actually gets pushed out and released. And a lot of that is a ton of overtime for, could be several weeks or even longer at a time. So people get burnt out and, they're overworked, and it's just a horrible time to be a game dev if there's a crunch that gets announced. Typically in a project management, you try to avoid stuff like that, which is why you have to plan and make sure your Gantt charts are in order and things line up. Of course, things come up, and that's where risk assessment comes in, but that's a whole nother topic. Said he contemplated quitting, and I mean, okay, so check this out. The money finally turned up at the end of November, and my family and I were thankful it did. It was the first payment I'd received in 11 months. id Software stopped talking to me, but the payment confirmed my role in the project had finally ended. I finished the project feeling unhappy, empty, and in a state of anxiety. I crunched for 2 years straight thanks to a rigid, brutal music schedule. So yeah, there's a lot more to this article too. I highly recommend you read it, but we're going to go back to Bethesda's statement responding to all this, now that you got a little bit more backstory on Mick's side of things. So, we are aware of all the details and history in this matter and unequivocally support Marty, Chad, and the team at id Software. And we reject the distortion of the truth and selective presentation of incomplete facts. We stand ready with full and complete documented evidence to disclose in an appropriate venue as needed. Looks like they're ready to go to court over it if they got to. That's exactly what that sounds like. The statements posted online have incited harassment and threats of violence against Marty, Chad, and the id Software team. I gotta point this out that Mick did say in his statement he did not condone threats of harassment against the team, and that was not what his mission was with whistleblowing. That was not what he wanted. So if fans have any respect for Mick, they would respect that statement too. But as we know, people can be assholes, so. We remain incredibly proud of id's previous collaborations with Mick and ask that fans refrain from reaching conclusions based on his account and, more importantly, from attacking any of the individuals mentioned on either side, including Marty, Chad, or Mick. The receipts that Mick has in his statement are pretty compelling, so it's going to be interesting to see how things develop with this and what id Software is going to do to try to course correct and smooth things over. Who knows? But all I know is I'm going to stay tuned to it, and if anything new comes up with it, you know, I'll cover it on this channel, and yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, I'll post all the links to this information in the description so that you can check it out at your own leisure. But yeah, there's some crazy shit. And it just goes to show you just how crazy things can get behind the scenes when it comes down to production, and especially when it comes down to music. You know, so in any case, guys, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on too. That way my videos, when I post them, don't get completely buried underneath everything else that you guys got going on. And stay tuned for some more music. I work very hard on the drum covers and any drumming that I do on the channel. As a matter of fact, that content takes way longer than anything like this. And it always is hugely appreciated when you guys check that stuff out. So please continue to do so. I understand that what I play might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I assume if you're here and subscribe to me, you share a passion and a love for metal music and drumming in particular that I do as well. So yeah, so in any case, guys, stay tuned throughout the week. I got more coming your way. Take care.